Bienvenue to Bonjour Paris Live. Our online event series, free for Bonjour Paris members, offers expert lectures, discovery talks, and conversations about la vie française. In between your trips to France, we're here to inspire you. Bonjour Paris has been online since 1995, almost as old as the internet itself. Our website is packed with interesting articles about the culture and history of Paris. And now, thanks to the support of our growing membership base, we're able to showcase new offerings like video and online talks. For details about all the benefits of Bonjour Paris membership, visit our membership page on our website. Enjoy today's presentation and à bientôt!
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Bonjour Paris Live. I'm Sylvia Davis, culture editor for France Media and your host today for a Tour de France of cheeses, guided by Emily Monaco. So I will now invite Emily to start her video. Hi, Emily.
Hi, Sylvia. Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. And a big thank you, because I know you are in between trips. So you're in Paris right now. You just arrived from the US, and now tomorrow you're leaving for England. So
another one of the places I love to eat cheese in, but the French.
Agree, Paul. So a huge thank you for that. We appreciate it, and we always enjoy your talk so much. And everybody, if you remember, Emily already was with us a few months ago, showing us how to present the best cheese board. So if you missed that, you can go to the video hub, not right now, after that you can, and watch it again. So Emily, I always, it's such a treat to learn about cheese, because first, there's so much to learn. It's just, how many cheeses are there?
Most people estimate about 1,800, but we had 3 new cheeses during COVID alone. So
I was trying to say farms, so I was way off.
Oh, so many.
I always feel that sometimes people ask me, what's the best way to integrate in France? And I feel like it's a perfect way to make friends in France. If you take an interest in food and wine, you'll never be short of topics of conversation.
Absolutely. And I think the topic of today's talk is actually really well suited to what you just said, because I think coming from the US, where I think often, a really easy way to make low stakes conversation with someone new is to talk about the local sports team. And in France, a really low stakes way to make conversation with someone is to talk to them about their local food products. So be it their wine, their cheese, their dishes. So I think
absolutely
you're right.
And as you will probably show us, you learn also about the different regions and the history and the different the different traditions. So I'll let's get to it. I'll stop talking now, and it's over to you.
So today's talk, putting French cheeses on the map, I think, is one of many different ways that we can make some sense of just the sheer variety of cheese there is in France. I mean, as we mentioned, France is home to over 1,000, some estimate up to 1,800 different cheeses. And as we saw in my last talk, which, as Sylvia mentioned, you can go and check out, but not right now, these cheeses can be divided into multiple categories. So you might see cheeses divided into cheese families, which is kind of what we talked about the last time I was here. And I think that's a really great way to just sort of make sense of the sheer variety of what you see in the cheese case. But we can also divide cheeses in other ways. We can divide it based on the milk type that's being used. So in France, we're generally talking about one of 3 different milk types. So cow, goat, or sheep. But an essential element for me governing both of these aspects of cheese and its overall flavor is this idea of terroir. So people who are familiar with the world of wine are probably already familiar with this word terroir, which is a word that we use in French, but we also use in English. And basically, you see this root terr at the beginning. Terre means earth. And so we're basically talking about how the food or drink is linked to the place where it's from. So the example that I always give of this is champagne. Everybody knows, or most people know from whether from actually drinking champagne or just from being on Twitter a lot, that champagne is the word that we use for a sparkling wine that comes from a very specific region in France. If you are doing things exactly the same way as they would in Champagne, using the exact same grapes, the exact same vinification methods, but you're somewhere else in the world, whether that's on the other side of the world in California or just outside of the delineated Champagne region, you're not allowed to use the word champagne. And the reason why isn't just because we in France love rules, it's because there's this idea that the foods and drinks that we make are inextricably linked to the regions that they come from. So when we talk about terroir, we're talking about a number of different things. And I think the thing that first comes to mind because of that link with earth is this idea of the climate, the topography. Are we in the mountains? Are we by the sea? Is it very cold? Is it very hot? What kind of soil do we have? So those things are all going to have, their part to play in deciding, what our cheesescape looks like in France. We're also going to be thinking a little bit about the kinds of animals that are naturally present in different areas. And when I say naturally, they might have been introduced, many, many years ago. For example, one of the regions we're going to talk about has a cow breed that has been present since the 9th century. But suffice it to say, today, that cow breed is synonymous with the region. So it might be the individual breed. It might also just be the species. So, if we're in a region that's known for having a lot of goats, that might have an impact on the kind of cheese that we'll find there. And then the last part of terroir, and the part that I think is not mentioned nearly enough, but is so, so important, is the people, the human side of things. So we're talking about traditions. Cheese is not something that makes itself. Without human intervention, we would have no cheese. We would have milk, but we wouldn't have cheese. So we have history, we have traditions, we have heritage. And those traditions are passed down over time in a region. And so those traditions are an important part of terroir. And that's something that we see in what we call the cahier des charges. So that's CAHIERDES, and that's a document that's established for every single AOC or AOP that we have in France. When we talk about an AOC or an AOP, that's the rule that says we can't call it champagne if it's not in Champagne. For efficiency's sake, because I have a lot to say about cheese and not about the AOC and AOP specifically, let's say that they're about the same thing, but the AOC is controlled on the French level and the AOP is controlled on the European Union level. Either way, what we're looking at are labels that are established by charters that are written by people already producing this food or wine. And they, in this document, will detail what they think are the important elements that make this food or wine worthy of wearing its name. And so they're essentially writing a document controlling or protecting the terroir of that food or drink. So in the world of cheese, we see terroir governed in this way when it comes to 46, soon to be 47 different cheeses. And those are the cheeses that have the AOP label. Now, these cheeses are not necessarily the best cheeses that France produces. They're also not bad cheeses. The fact that they have this label is not a question of quality. It's a question of consistency. But they are some of the best known cheeses. They're the ones that you're most likely to find outside of France, and also the ones that you're most likely to find outside of their region, the regions where they're produced. So as we're taking our trip through France's cheese-making regions, you're going to hear me talking a lot about the AOP cheeses, and that's not by any means a reflection of the superior quality of these cheeses. It's just that they're the best known ones, and when there are non-AOP cheeses that are worthy of mention insofar as we're talking about traditions and techniques, I will be sure and call them out, and I hope that you all have questions about those kinds of cheeses as we come to the end of the part where I talk and the part where you ask all of your burning questions. But this map is going to allow us to take a broader look at the ways in which the climate, the traditions, the history, and these endemic animal breeds are going to have an effect on what you might expect from cheeses in different regions, And to my mind, what that means is it might just inspire you to go traveling to a region where the cheeses sound like they are your cup of tea. And it also gives us a little bit more of a global look at what France looks like from a climate perspective, because I think a lot of people come to France. They might spend a lot of time in Paris. They might spend a lot of time in the south, but there are lots and lots of regions that a lot of people don't manage to get themselves to right away. And so we want to make sure that we detail those regions as well. That being said, we are going to start things off in a region that I think is familiar to a lot of people, and that is Normandy. And Normandy is known for this big, beautiful cow called the Normand cow. Very appropriate. So Normandy is a very rich dairy producing area. We don't just have great cheeses here. We also have fantastic butters and even the one of the only protected heavy creams in France. So you'll often see heavy cream or creme fraiche served with desserts in Normandy. And it makes sense that we would have a really rich dairy tradition here when you think about the climate, right? We're overlooking the water. There's a lot of rain. It's a very moist climate, which means we have great green pastures where these beautiful cows can graze. Now, Normand cattle, this is the cow that I was evoking when I was talking earlier on, is a breed of cow that has been in Normandy for a very, very long time. It was actually brought to Normandy in the 9th and 10th centuries by waves of Viking conquerors. And yes, I did say Viking. When we say Normandy, we're actually talking about the Norsemen. So Vikings were pretty prevalent in Normandy over the course of the 9th and 10th centuries. And they brought this breed that fared very, very well in Normandy. Now, one thing that makes Normands pretty unique is that they are raised in France as a dual purpose breed. So they're both raised for their meat and for their milk. And their milk is particularly rich. So when we look at the fat and protein composition of a Normand cow's milk, we're looking at about 42 grams of fat per liter and 35 grams of protein per liter. And that's, as a counterpoint, Prime Holsteins, which represent 80% of the dairy cows in France today, have just 39.3 grams of fat per liter of milk and 31.8 grams of protein. So we're talking about really, really rich milk, perfect for making cheese. But what kind of cheese? So in Normandy, we are mostly going to be talking about soft cheeses, and we are mostly going to be talking about washed rind cheeses like Livarot or Pont-l'Évêque, at least if we're in the Pays d'Auge, which is slightly to the west of Normandy. And then as we move east into the Pays de Brie, we're going to see bloomy rinded cheeses like this heart-shaped Neuchâtel, which legends tell us local maidens used to give to occupying English soldiers as a token of their love. So this is one of the oldest cheeses in Normandy. If you go to the Pays de Brie, make sure that you claim this is the oldest cheese. If you go to the Pays d'Auge, make sure that you claim that Livarot is the oldest cheese because they are at odds with one another. In the Pays d'Auge, we are going to see mostly these washed rind cheeses until the 19th century invention of Camembert, which is now one of France's favorite cheeses. And it actually displaced Livarot as as Normandy's most popular cheese in the 19th century. So up until the 19th century, we had 4.5 million Livarot being produced as compared to 2 million Camembert. These days, Camembert were producing about 6,000 tons a year. And Livarot is the least popular of the Norman cheeses with just 750 tons a year. So we sort of saw a historic precedent for washed rind cheeses being displaced by the slightly easier to love bloomy rinded cheeses. The other soft cheeses in Normandy are going to kind of be in the same vein. So we're talking about non-AOP cheeses like Pavé d'Isigny or Pavé d'Auge, or the Crémeux du Mont-Saint-Michel, which is a very, very creamy double cream bloomy rinded cheese. There's a handful of sort of pressed tome style cheeses, which we find typically in France in a lot of mountainous regions, and a handful of goat cheeses too. But by and large, if I had to think of like a global mindset, okay, what do the cheeses from Normandy look like? Typically, they're going to be soft, they're going to be creamy, and they're going to have a bit of personality. We're not talking about really, really mild, bloomy rinded cheeses. They're going to tend to have some character. If you have Norman cheeses in your fridge and you open the fridge, you know about it. If you move a little bit further to the south from Normandy and into the center of France, you're going to see a very different style of cheese take hold. And that, again, has a lot to do with the animal that is prevalent in this. Oops, that's not what I wanted to talk about next. We're moving right along. If we move, well, no, let's go talk about that, and then we'll circle back. So if we move to the south and then a little bit to the center, we are in the Loire Valley, and the Loire Valley is particularly well known for its goats. Now, there's a story that some people will tell you as though it is fact, and some people will tell you as though it is legend. It's a very pretty story, which generally means it's legend. But basically, there's a story that in the 8th century, there was a wave of invasion, migration from the Iberian Peninsula of Moorish sort of Arab people with Arab ancestry who were led by an Andalusian general into France, over the Pyrenees Mountains, and all the way up into the center. And it was only once they reached the center that they sort of settled there, until they had an altercation, the Battle of Poitiers with Charles Martel, and they were pushed out of the region quite rapidly. So some people will tell you that this is the reason why we have so much goat cheese in the Loire Valley, because these Moorish people brought goats from the Arabian Peninsula into Spain and then up into France. Unfortunately for that story, there is evidence dating back to the Neolithic era in France that we have had goats for a very, 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 very long time. But we do know that rennet coagulated cheeses have their origin in the Arab world. And so it is possible that the very first rennet coagulated goat's milk cheeses did come from that battle. And that's something that we see in the names of certain cheeses from this region, including, for instance, Sainte-Maure de Touraine, which is named after Saint Maur of the Touraine, of the region around Tours. In the Loire Valley, we're going to see a lot of different goat cheeses, and goat cheeses are the ones that tend to have the most fun with the shapes. So you might see, donut-shaped cheeses. You might see pyramids like Pouligny or Valençay. You will see this beautiful goat cheese, which is one of my favorites right now, called the Motté sur Feuille, which is named after the chestnut leaf that it ages on. And this is about to become France's 47th AOP cheese. So check it out while it's hot. And you'll also see non-AOP cheeses in this area. So, for example, this Brie comes from Poitou, and it's a goat's milk Brie. So it's very, very white. You can tell just from looking at it that it doesn't have the same color as most Bries. And so that's a Brie that's going to be made with goat's milk. You're going to see, for example, this sort of shape of cheese, Sainte-Maure de Touraine, as I think one of the coolest ways that we showcase the way in which the history of a cheese is still encapsulated in how it's prepared today. So, first thing to note is that it looks like a cylinder, but it's actually not a perfect cylinder. It's slightly tapered to one side. So the side that's not cut is slightly narrower than the side that's been cut into. And that's because originally this almost cylinder of cheese was made by using a mold that had been woven out of reeds. And it's very hard to weave reeds into a perfect cylinder. And so instead, they wove it into an almost cylinder. And today, even though we use plastic molds to make this cheese, they reflect that that same shape that was historically the shape of the Sainte-Maure de Touraine. Another thing that you might notice is that there is a stick sticking out of the cheese. That is a piece of rye grass. And traditionally, because this cheese was so long, they would put the ryegrass in it to help it stick together when they moved it from rack to rack. These days, we don't have that much problem keeping the cheeses together because we've normalized so much of the process. But again, that ryegrass keeps the tradition alive, and also It's a calling card a little bit. These days, cheese producers will actually use a laser to engrave the name of their farm onto the ryegrass. So when you have a Sainte-Maure de Touraine and you're like, oh my God, this one was particularly delicious, you can take out the ryegrass and see what farm that cheese comes from. So these cheeses are going to tend to be a little bit milder. They're going to tend to be quite grassy, and that reflects the terroir of the Loire Valley, where we have fairly mild climates, lots and lots of grass. We are going to have quite a bit more assertive character in the cheeses from the east and the north of France. So if we think about sort of northern France, we're on the border with Belgium. Eastern France, we're looking sort of at Champagne, Burgundy, and Alsace-Lorraine. These are areas where centuries ago in the Middle Ages, there were a lot of monasteries. And monks, typically, had a lot of time on their hands to do things like repeat the same gesture over and over and over again. And luckily for us, that means they become very, very good at things like beer making, alcohol production, candy making, honey making, and cheese making. So monastic style cheeses are typically washed. And this comes from a number of different sort of factors. Number one, cheeses react a lot to changes in barometric pressure or temperature, and that means that you can get cracks on the surfaces of your cheese. And the best way to seal up a crack is to sort of wipe it with some water or some alcohol, and you sort of add more moisture back to the surface of the cheese and seal up the crack. We have another wonderful legend of a monk who saw a crack in his cheese and was like, oh no, what am I going to do? Reaches for a rag and a bucket and starts to sort of seal up that crack. Only this is a monk in the 7th century, and he hasn't washed his hands in probably 6 months. So whatever bacteria is on his hands gets onto the cheese, and that gives it this very sticky, orange, stinky sort of surface. So depending on who you ask, again, don't go saying the wrong cheese was the first in the wrong region. But if you go to the north, so on the border between France and Belgium, they're going to tell you that Maroilles was the very first washed-rind cheese. If you go to the east, on the border between France and Germany in the Vosges Mountains, they will tell you that Munster was the original washed-rind cheese. Either way, what we know is that these monasteries would transmit this knowledge not only to one another, but to local women who would then adopt the methods themselves. Now, by and large, because we don't necessarily have access to a lot of clean drinking water in the 7th century, these cheeses are going to be washed mainly with alcohol. So, for example, in Burgundy, we have Époisses. Époisses is washed with Mar de Bourgogne, which is the grappa that we make in Burgundy with what's left after we've made wine.
Emily,
Yes.
I have a question?
Please.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, anytime.
Ruth very kindly asked, it's a really good idea if we can, the spelling of
Yes.
the cheeses when we mention a new
Sure.
cheese, because the captions don't quite get it. But
Sure, no worries. Do you want me to go back and name the cheeses that we already saw, or should
we'll just going forward, because
Going
then we can add them in the video, but from now on,
Sounds
maybe
good.
yes.
And if there's any cheese that I mentioned and you want the spelling of it, feel free to let me know. We can go back to it.
Great idea.
Which one-
Yes, just ask enter
Yeah.
in the Q&A which one you
Right.
would like to know.
From
Perfect.
now forward, I will spell them. So this is Époisses, Epoisses, and that's a cheese from Burgundy. And let's just go back and I'll do Maroilles, so Maroilles, and Munster, Munster. So Époisses is the one from Burgundy, and this one's the one that's washed in Mar de Bourgogne. Meanwhile, Langres is one that comes from the Champagne region. It's often washed and brined, but it can also be washed in local eau de vie or liqueur. So you'll see this one is also often served. You can see it kind of has a divot in the top, and we'll pour things into that well, including champagne. So these cheeses were particularly beloved in this region, not only because they sort of grew up here, but also because of the monks' diet. So Benedictine and Cistercian monks, who were the most common sort of monks that you would see in this area, had a lot of rules around whether they were allowed to eat meat and when they were allowed to eat meat. And these cheeses, if you give them a try, you'll notice they have a pretty meaty, kind of brothy, eggy kind of flair to them. And so if you're a monk who can't eat any meat, it's really nice to have some cheese around that gives you meaty vibes. So they became really popular and stayed really popular in this region. You'll also see in this region a couple of small goat cheeses, so things like charolais, or goat-cow hybrids like Mâconnais. We talked about the Loire Valley, where we have quite a few different goat cheeses. So this one is called the Mothais-sur-Feuille, Mothais, space S-U-R, space F-E-U-I-L-L-E. This is a goat's milk brie. This is Sainte-Maure de Touraine, Santemeure, Detouraine. But there are other regions that are really well known for their goat cheeses. And as compared to the goat cheeses of the Loire Valley, the goat cheeses in, for example, the south of France are going to be quite different. So if we think about the goat cheeses in the Loire Valley, goat cheese in the Loire Valley are the ones that I always love to have people try, because when so often I have, visitors from America who book a tour with me, a tasting in Paris, and they say to me, "We don't like goat cheese." And I'm like, that feels like a challenge. And when people say that to me, I typically would get them a goat cheese from the Loire. These goat cheeses are really creamy. They're quite delicate. They're very grassy. They're not super salty, and they don't have that really pronounced goaty flavor that we get from goat cheeses, for example, in the United States. So I brought a Humboldt Fog, which is a San Francisco-made goat cheese, to France and tried it with some friends and was like, oh yeah, okay, this is goat cheese how I grew up with it. It's tangy, it's acidic, it's got this kind of barnyardy quality to it. And in most Loire Valley goat cheeses, you just won't get that. You'll get things that are a little more lemony, a little more grassy with maybe some hazelnut vibes. Move down to the south, however, and it's a whole different animal, but it's the same animal. It's still a goat. So this, for example, is a Banon, Banon. So a Banon de Provence is a raw milk goat's cheese that is wrapped in chestnut leaves. And a Banon is wrapped that way because it needs to be preserved longer. If you think about the difference in the climate between the Loire and the south, you're going to have much warmer temperatures, and you're going to have a much more arid climate. So already from the get-go, these goats are grazing not on, fresh green grass, but more on what we'd call the herbe de la garrigue. So things like rosemary or wild fennel or wild thyme. So they already have a lot more of an herbaceous flavor in their milk, and that comes through in the cheese. But then we have cheeses that need to be kept and transported in hotter temperatures. So we come up with techniques to do that. So in the case of Banon, we're going to wrap it in leaves. In the case of something called picoudon, so picoudon is also from the south. And it's already, you can see just from looking at the cross-section, it's a lot denser than many goat cheeses that you might see at home, or many goat cheeses indeed from the Loire. So its name actually is local patois for the one that stings or the one that bites back. So it's a little bit spicier. It's much more animal, as the French would say, much more barnyardy. And some places take this one step further. So there's a method of aging picoudon called the Dieulefit method. So that's Dieulefit. And so that's the name of the town where this method of aging is popular. And they'll actually wash their goat cheeses and then keep them in earthenware jars to sort of preserve them for as long as possible. It gives them a lot more character. It gives them a lot more flavor. But it grew up not as a way of flavoring the cheese, but rather as a way of, sustaining it over a longer period of time. And so on the border between France and Spain, we're going to see the popularity of a cheese known as Ossau-Iraty. So Ossau-Iraty has very, very long roots in that same pastoral sort of transhumance tradition that I was mentioning, where the producers would take their animals up into the mountains and then back down into the valleys. And so we have evidence that this practice in this area dates back to the Neolithic period. And this cheese became particularly popular among sheep farmers thanks to influence from Roquefort. So essentially, Roquefort producers had started laiterie, which is big, sort of more industrial milk production and transformation facilities at the beginning of the 20th century. And in the 70s, Roquefort production sort of fell because the popularity of Roquefort was falling. And so a lot of people who had traditionally been making Roquefort decided to make Ossau-Iraty. And the Ossau-Iraty producers who were already making this cheese got nervous that the sudden influx of more industrial producers would endanger the quality of their cheese, that they very quickly applied for an AOC in 1975. And in 1980, they were able to protect the traditional ancestral iteration of this cheese, which for anyone who hasn't tried it before, first of all, I say Ossau-Iraty. It's in Basque, so that's not at all how it's spelled. It's Ossau-Iraty. And it is not dissimilar to a manchego, if you've ever tried manchego in Spain. So that gives us a bit of a global overview of the map of French cheesemaking. Of course, there are so many wonderful creations that I haven't even gotten a chance to talk about, but I hope that gives you a little bit of an introduction to what we can expect from the world of French cheese. And for anyone who, wants to hear more, you can always follow me on Instagram. I'm constantly talking about cheese. I'm at Emily_in_France. I also have a newsletter, Emily in France, on Substack. And I am also here for a little while longer to chat with anyone who wants to ask any questions about anything that we were talking about. So
fantastic. Thank you so much, Emily. That was such a good overview. I know it's a challenge to just explain this in a very short time. We already have questions coming in.
Oh, great.
And I wanted to, first let me say Ruth said, merci bien for spelling out the names of the cheeses. Thank you, Ruth, for your question, because it was a great, it improved actually our being able to follow. So I was trying to follow with the names on the screen, so I hope that worked as well. And we have Madeline ask, it's a really good question, is why didn't people get sick from the bacteria on the monk's hands?
So the answer is they probably did at some point. But the bacteria that we cultivate now on these cheeses is a very specific bacteria called Brevibacterium linens. And it's the exact same bacteria. I'm sorry for anyone who's eating their dinner right now or their lunch. It's the same bacteria that makes your feet smell. So it's a bacteria that
there is a real correlation there.
Oh, yeah. That's why your cheese smells like that. So this specific bacteria, when you cultivate it, in specific settings, and you know what you're looking for in terms of color, so it's got this rusty color, theoretically would not cause you any harm. Black mold, you typically don't want to eat that. My guess would be that a lot of people got sick before they realized that exactly what was safe and what wasn't. And that's honestly why we have so many pushes for more industrialization, for more pasteurization. People get nervous about the presence of bacteria, but honestly, bacteria and mold can't have cheese without bacteria or mold. You just need to make sure that you're looking for the right ones. So you practice makes perfect, and if you have a little tummy bug and then you eat more cheese, and hopefully you feel okay.
Yeah, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Thank you, Madeline, for the question. Margaret asks, it may not be a fair question, but if you could only have one cheese, which would it be? Love your reportage. It's delicious. Thank you.
So I'm going to preface this by saying that my favorite cheese changes constantly. I always have a new favorite. I recently got my hands on an entire wheel of perfectly aged Manigodine, so the cheese with the spruce wrap bark that I showed you. I can show you again. This one. And
Yes.
I just fell in
With
love.
a corset.
Exactly, and it has a really unique story. It was made by at the behest of an ager by a producer in the Manigot Valley who wanted to be able to export raw milk Reblochon to the United States through a series of unfortunate events that never managed to happen. But this was an invention that was trying to bring cheese to the people, and I would argue it made Reblochon even more delicious. So I'm very into this one right now. Unfortunately, it's no longer in season. And so, my current favorite is this guy, which is Motet-sur-Feuille. But I'm about to go to the UK, and I have a real weakness for Stilton. So that might, if you ask me next week, my favorite might be Stilton.
And Ruth Ruth says, fabulous presentation. Is Androuet still the best fromage that it was in the 60s and 70s?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Androuet, I have to celebrate Androuet because Androuet was the very first place in the world where you could buy such a variety of cheeses in just one place. That was the original Androuet's idea, is to bring cheeses from the regions and sell them in one place. To my mind, it's no longer the best of the best, the crème de la crème. For me, my personal favorites in Paris are Laurent Dubois, Quatre Hommes, for sort of more of your like old school established cheese shops. And then what's cool is there are so many young people just starting out and bringing really cool creations to the Parisian landscape. So there's a place called La Laiterie de Paris where they actually bought a farm in Normandy and make their own Camembert, and they also make their own goat cheese in Paris. There's a place called Tact et Vermeaux where they have, slight Japanese influences on their cheeses. There's a place called the Fromagerie Goncourt where the founder actually did a Tour de France on a bike to discover all of these different French cheeses before opening up his shop in the 11th. So, and that's just off the top of my head. So Androuet is, for me, like a sure value. You know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
But I think, to my mind, there are a lot of even more exciting places to buy cheese in Paris these days.
Which gives me an idea. You must come back and tell us about the best places to buy cheese.
Oh, always.
Wow.
You'll need to come on a walking tour with me.
And I left your details on the screen because a great way to learn about all these places, of course, following you on Substack.
Oh, yeah.
And we have so many questions. I hope we can get to them. Let me just
I try and keep my answers shorter.
Madeline asks, where does Brie come in popularity? I thought it was the most popular.
Okay, so I almost talked about Brie, and then I didn't because there are so many cheeses to cover, and I also apologize to anybody from Corsica because I left you in the lurch. We'll have to...
Actually, the next question is about what about Corsican cheese
what
from
about
Sharon?
I know. Okay, so Brie is the local cheese of Paris. And I think it's one of the most famous cheeses that we see from France outside of France. But within France, it's Paris's cheese. And it's less popular than something like Camembert. But basically, it's the only, Brie de Meaux and Brie de Meaux are the only two AOP cheeses that we have in Paris, or in the Paris region, in Ile-de-France. There are actually 7 different cheeses that can use the name Brie, but only 2 are protected by AOP. All of them come from just outside of Paris on the eastern side, kind of near Fontainebleau Forest. It's very popular abroad. I think probably because a lot of people came into contact with it in Paris. But in France itself, Camembert is the more popular bloomy-rinded cheese. Corsica, I am so sorry, my Corsican friends. I had to try and keep things to 40 minutes. So I went for geography and I stuck to the hexagon. But Corsica is a super interesting region for cheese. Most cheeses from Corsica are going to be made with sheep's milk. They tend to be quite assertive, quite heady, and really rich. Sheep's milk is a marvel for cheese making because it is higher in fat than the milk of any other animal, including the water buffalo. And I say that as somebody with Italian roots. So Quebec Neapolitans, we can look at the data together. But they have very, very high fat content in their milk, which means that you end up with these cheeses that have a really lovely melt in your mouth quality. Because we have regions in Corsica where we're going to need to preserve cheeses, we do have a lot of hard cheeses. We also have a lot of soft cheeses like broccio, which is like a very, very young, almost ricotta-y style cheese. We even have cheeses similar to a legendary cheese in Sardinia where there are live maggots crawling around on it. I have not tried that yet because apparently you have to go to the producer to get it. But Corsica has, I think we could spend an entire day just talking about the variety of Corsican cheese. But as a sort of global mindset, they tend to be sheepy. They have this sort of lanolin quality to them, which means they smell like wet sheep. They're really creamy, and they run a huge span between really, really mild and really, really crazy assertive. So you can find anything your little heart desires in Corsica, provided you like sheep's milk.
Excellent. Thank you, Sharon, for the question. That's a great question. And Arlene has a comment. Arlene says, I first ate Comté at my sister and brother-in-law's in Paris. I love it. There's only one place I can get it in the Bethesda, Washington area, Trader Joe's. I also get real French cheese in Deck. I hope I'm reading this correctly. In December. In December?
Or in December.
Oh, yes. It continues. Sorry. The December cheese tea in Trader Joe's is Brie really from France. Oh, excellent. And then Arlene's favorite is Comté, which she first ate in Paris. And it's, I think my favorite is pretty close. Salaire, is that in the same family?
Salaire is the pressed and uncooked, and Comté is the pressed and cooked, but either way, they're hard cheeses. Comté is the most popular cheese in France by far, most produced by volume, and most sold. Anyone who loves Comté, you can also find it at Whole Foods. And Murray's Cheese sells it online, so you can order it delivered to your house. One thing I love about buying Comté in the States, and also Salaire, if you can find it, although it's harder to find than Comté, is that you're actually going to get the exact same product that you would get in France when you buy it in the US. And that's because the rules of importing cheese in France stipulate, in the United States stipulate that any cheese that's sold in a shop in the United States must be aged for over 2 months if it was made with raw milk. And that's the case for hard cheeses. For soft cheeses, that's not the case. So it's when you're getting French Brie in the United States, you're getting Brie de Meaux, which is one of the non-AOP Bries, Nangis. And it's a cheese that's made with pasteurized milk. So it's going to have a much creamier, more buttery flavor than what you'd get in France, where you tend to have like a brinier, oysterier flavor with sort of cauliflower cheese vibes. So if you've tried Brie in America and you find your way in France, get to a cheese shop and buy some raw milk Brie de Meaux, MEAUX, which is the most popular Brie in France. And when you try that, you will see that it is quite different, quite a bit punchier than what we get in the US.
Excellent tip. And finally, what are you working on next, Emily? I know you always have interesting projects.
I've always got stuff on. I'm working on, I recently launched cheese tastings at my local 19th century covered market. So you come with me to the cheese counter. We go over what's on offer. You pick the things that you're most excited to try. We pair them with fantastic French wine. It's a hoot. So you can always come and do that with me in Paris. I also recently launched a collaboration with a pastry chef friend of mine where I take care of the nerdy side and she takes care of the more hands-on side. So we adventure our way down one of Paris's most beloved pastry streets. We pick a pastry that you're excited about. I tell you how it came to be and all of the different kings and queens and court jesters that got involved in its creation. And then Fanny teaches you how to make it yourself. So that's a fun project that I've launched.
Oh, fantastic. You have to come back and tell us about that.
We have to tell you about that. And then I'm also writing a novel about cheese and the power of the AOC. in
Fantastic.
preserving or negating tradition, as the case may be.
Fantastic. I don't know how
Thanks
you
a lot,
do
Tori.
it. Explained. Okay, thank you so much. And we can't wait for your next one. And before we go, let me share with you our next event. It's a very different event. So I'm very interested to see how you feel about it. It's a mindful journey into Van Gogh Starry Night on August 18th. So we will immerse into the world of Vincent van Gogh's work. And through it, Marianne Abadi, who is a certified mindfulness instructor, will guide us to a profound exploration. And so for this one, we recommend that you find a quiet space and, if possible, wear headphones to get the most of that experience. So thanks again, Emily. That was fantastic. Thanks, everybody, for all your questions and participation. I don't know if you can see Emily, but there's love emojis and applause. So until the next one from all of us at Bonjour Paris, merci et à bientôt.